I think it's time to start. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for attending this session. I'm partly responsible for this session this afternoon, but it's really Beat's fault that we do it. The reason is that last year I was here, and I had a talk about the technology in my company, which I will do tomorrow, by the way. But last year I couldn't because the company was just at a time of the conference we were going public, so we were going to the stock market. So my lawyers told me I couldn't talk, but Beat asked me to say a few words, and I kind of said the word risk, and that companies should take more risk, and he said we should have a session on that. And so the session that we will have this afternoon is patient safety and entrepreneurial risk. I hope this can be a very lively session, but before we do that, and while we do that, we have 4 speakers. And maybe the way to think about it is our first speaker, Robert. He's a scientist, and he's kind of the bridge between science and policy and regulations, and I think he will address that in his talk. Then afterwards, I will talk, and I find myself as the bridge of a scientist and business. That means trying to find money, trying to find investors. Then we have Andreas. While Robert is from Holland, I'm from Belgium working in Boston. Andreas is from Austria, so it's very international. And I think he thinks of himself as a bridge between discovery and commercial production, manufacturing, bring a product to the market. And then last but not least, we have Frank from FDA, an important partner for all of us. And I didn't ask him, but I think the bridge for him is between a scientist and bringing a product actually to the ones that need it, which are the patients. And whether that is first in clinical trials and later on the market, I think this is an important part of the process, and I'm so glad that Frank will be here. So what we will do is we will have about 20 minutes for each speaker, and then we will do some Q&A for each of the speakers, and then at the end, we still have time to do a more general Q&A. And Beat, meanwhile, is here, so he's responsible for this session, so thank you, Beat. Robert.
Yes, thank you, Werner. Okay, Beat, I also, on behalf of myself, thank you for helping organize this session. It's mainly your energy that made it happen, that we have this session, and I think we will have a very interesting session. So, to start with my talk, I had been discussing with Beat, okay, so what will we discuss? And after some time and some back and forth via the email and the telephone, I think we had a nice combination. I talk on the one hand on safety requirements in nanomedicine, and on the other hand about an approach to try and get this done in an efficient way. So as a starter, obviously everybody that is here probably agrees with me that nanotechnology is already having a great impact on many areas of medicine. And it says especially, but basically it's most of the disciplines in medicine that you can think of, and nanotechnology has some kind of impact. And on a more abstract level, you can also foresee that nanotechnology will enable changes in healthcare in a more fundamental way. It'll have completely novel methods for disease diagnosis and therapy, new and effective tools, but also, for example, by enabling point-of-care fast testing, it'll be a daily screening of health that will become possible. And also personalized treatments will be enabled not only by nanotechnology, but I think nanotechnology plays an important role in that. So what we have done in our institute, we have looked at several types of medical products. We did a sort of a horizon scan on nanomedical devices. For years, people had been saying, oh, it's not just medicinal products, not just drugs, also medical devices are benefiting from nanotechnologies. But there was no overview. We were looking, and so we thought, okay, we have to make it ourselves. It's a report that's available on our website. You can see the reference at the bottom. And as a summary, I can say that indeed nanotechnology applications in medical devices is quite a growing area. And there are an increasing number of patents and clinical trials, and also an increasing number of products on the market. And some of those have been on the market for actually quite a long time. For example, dentistry. If you look at the numbers of products on the market, dentistry is by far the largest number. We had help from the Trade Association for Dental Materials, and they came up with a number of about 3,500 products on the market that had some kind of nanomaterial inside. Furthermore, another trend we see is that one of the most important types of nanotechnology that are applied on medical devices are nanocoatings, or the surface modification of the materials at the nano level. And we see that cardiology, dentistry, neurology and orthopedics in particular make use of devices with such kind of coatings. Why would they do that? It gives an increased biocompatibility and thus integration of any implant material into the tissue will be better. Other benefits, for example, coatings with antimicrobial properties are also being used, preventing infections. Then another set of materials is those that are trying to mimic naturally occurring structures. So again, dentistry and orthopedics, you should think of dental filler materials or bone filler materials. They are constructed in a way, they're designed in a way that they will mimic the natural bone tissue or grow into it. And why do they do that? Again, because this creates optimal characteristics for biological, physical, but in case of dentistry also for the aesthetic characteristics of your material. You can tailor it to fit to the patient. Another group of products, which is actually quite different type of application, is the making use of the electric and magnetic properties, which is especially in cardiology and neurology. You can have an increased functional interface between your device, between the electrodes and for example, heart or nerve tissue. But also you can create batteries that are still as small or even smaller as the previous ones, but will have a much longer lifetime. And finally, one category which I think most people will know, in oncology, there are free nanomaterials which are being used for therapy and also for surgical guiding. This is a topic of debate. From the medicinal product side, many people are used to having free products that are being used, and the concept that a free particle, nanomaterial, could be a medical device is under regulatory debate. And following the definitions, you can say yes, of course. The main distinction between a medicinal product and a medical device is that a medicinal product has some sort of pharmacological or immunological or metabolic action. And at least in Europe, we have an additional category, is those substances that being administered for diagnostic purposes. So contrast agents for imaging, for example, are by definition also a medicinal product. But if it's used for surgical guiding in an operation to just see how far you should go, that's not diagnosis. So these kind of things are actually quite interesting to see. What we did also was look at clinical trials. We found 115 products in clinical trials. This was in 2015. And most of them in dentistry and oncology. We also did a similar exercise for medicinal products, which was published also in 2015. And again, we saw that there are quite a number of products already on the market, but a lot more even in the pipeline in clinical trials. So if I summarize that, you can say, well, there's a lot of opportunity, a lot of possibility. There are breakthrough solutions. Hundreds of products are on the market or in clinical studies, and if you look at the products that are not yet in the clinic, then there's an enormous opportunity. So, is there a problem? Well, if you think that what you're really after is to get your product to the patient, so if you look at the, I think I should be able to use this. Yes, if you think this is your goal, and from a business perspective, of course, you want return on investment. But in order to get there, you have to make sure that you can defend the fact that it's safe. So you have all these great products, but you have to be able to defend that it's safe. And you can see the regulatory requirements before you are allowed to go to the market as some kind of a sieve. So what you have to do is, after you have your brilliant idea, you have to think, does it work? But not only does it work, you also have to consider, is it safe? Because the regulatory and registration requirements, they will ask also for the safety, not only for the quality. And in order to go from does it work and is it safe to it is safe and or the benefits are greater than the risks, you may have to work on your design in order to make it fit through the safe. So, if you then look at design aspects, what can you do? You should realize that any physical chemical parameters can affect the properties also in terms of exposure, the kinetics, but also the hazards of a material. So we had a project sponsored by the Dutch government in which we did a horizon scan of the products. I showed you the picture earlier, but we also looked at benefits and risks, and the question was also to fill one of the gaps we could identify. So the first result was this paper I showed you earlier. And then we did desk research. Both of them were recently submitted. And the third one is a PhD project on interaction of nanomedicines with the immune system. This was something we found out pretty early that that's one area that needs more attention. And I give you a very brief results of those second stage parts of the investigation. If you look at physical-chemical properties, we believe that there are a number of critical parameters, including composition, size distribution, shape, mass, surface area. Well, you can read the rest. And we looked in registration files, and we saw that particularly in the older files, there were either no data on these kind of parameters, or it was just size and size distribution. So in future, there should be more attention to that. We also looked at pharmacokinetics, and we, after a lot of debate, we made a distinction between the drugs that are actually formulated as a nanoparticle, so an iron oxide particle, for example, or an API that is actually included in a nanocarrier, like a liposome. And if you look at the first category, which we named NAPIs, if you look at the data, it's not actually sure whether the pharmacokinetics are determined for the nanoparticle or for a disintegrated version of it, or for a dissolved fraction of it, or for a combination. And if you look at the API in a nanocarrier, then again only the total amount of API is being measured. So it's not always sure whether you have the API inside the nanocarrier or whether it's the released API. Toxicological endpoints, we have looked at available data on several toxicological endpoints, and we tried to match that to types of structures of different nanomedicinal products, trying to see if we could see some kind of trend. And it found, well, the data, we did not have enough data to make such connections. And we also looked at different sets of products which have either a non and a non-nano formulation. So, for example, Doxil, which you can look at the free, doxorubicin, and the pegylated liposome. And we went to see the side effects that were mentioned as found in humans. And we looked at the differences between that. And well, the data were quite difficult to interpret, but well, what we could see, of course, is that the famous Karpa effect came also out of that set. And for the rest, it was quite a long list of side effects for both types of formulations. What we could see as a confirmation of our earlier conclusions, also from these data, is that indeed the immunotox properties of the NMPs need further attention. Because all the nanomedicinal products eventually reach the system, that's quite easy to follow. And we think that there is a specific testing battery that's necessary to assess the function of the immune system. And also we have another topic which we studied in relation to this, that you should look at endotoxin levels. And it's crucial also to interpret, for example, immunotox assay. So as a conclusion for this kind of work, we believe that the regulatory science framework for assessment of the risk-benefit ratio of nanomedicinal products needs further development, or some people would say further refinement. And we think that there is a lot of possibilities to work on this. But one aspect that I would like to focus on for the purpose of this session is a concept that a number of people in the room are already familiar with. And what we both like to do is to get the innovations to the market and also to develop the regulatory framework. And one way to achieve that is to make use of what is called the safe innovation approach. And this is a concept that has been worked on for a number of years now, and me and my colleagues have been involved either in projects in our own institute or in national projects, but also in European projects like NanoReg and NanoReg 2. And currently there is a big interaction going on with the stakeholders, which we have tried to do from the beginning, and I think that's one of the main things that needs to be done. So what is this safe innovation approach? It actually combines two main concepts. Safe by design, which is well known both in medical devices and also in medicinal products. From the start of your R&D phase, you should think about building in the safety by the correct design. And if you look from the side of the regulators, what you also want is regulatory preparedness. You don't want to be surprised at the time that a product is ready to go to market, that something something completely new needs to be assessed. And one way to work with that is a so-called stage gate innovation model. And it means that from the conceptual idea, you work with a number of stages where you screen the important characteristics of your product, and to make sure that you don't have characteristics that you can already predict at this stage that it will never make it from the stage 4 to the market. Then at this stage it's much easier to amend your design. And if you're doing that, then uncertainty and risk will decrease. So how should you do that? Then there has been work in the project. The project is on nanomaterials in general. It's not on nanomedicinal products particularly, but it's aiming to have different risk potentials in the early stages and even stronger risk indicators in the later stages. And finally, you have demonstrators, topics, tests that you have to do. You go through also through this side to look at which parameters have to be measured and which tests eventually are necessary. If you would work it through until the end, then this would be your system. There is a more elaborated decision tree for assessing the possible safety concerns for these kind of products. And as you can see, it's really a flow chart that at some point you can get to the minimal safety concerns, but you have to be sure that if you have a nanomaterial, that you go through this in the right way, and you look at these important aspects of is there a stable coating, is there a stability, or what about dissolution, accumulation perhaps, and finally important genotox and immunotox. I don't have enough time, unfortunately, to go into detail, and there is also a more advanced decision tree which I'd never intended to go into detail. I just give you the reference for this. What I would like to point out also is a definition from ISO of risk. It's a combination of the probability of occurrence of harm and the severity of that harm. But if you look at the standard for medical devices, it's clearly identified also. Acceptability of risk is influenced by stakeholders' perception. And that may depend on factors like cultural and socioeconomic or educational background, the values of society, and also the actual and perceived state of health of a patient. So, in fact, the patient's opinion. And it's very sometimes illuminating if you're working with this kind of other stakeholders, because you will realize that for Dutch persons or German persons, the perception of a risk will be quite different than from a Japanese person, for example. And also that if a healthy person would think that a certain adverse effects would be too big a risk, then a patient who is actually going to benefit from the other side might have a completely different weighing in the acceptability of such risks. So in summary, the safe innovation approach means that if you combine safe by design concepts and regulatory preparedness, then you can get to a timely formulation of regulatory requirements. The way to do that is to interact. So not only between the regulators and the developers and the industry people along the chain, but also with other stakeholders that are not involved either in the development or in the regulation. If they're not involved, you should think, how can we involve them, because they will have important impact. So this safe innovation approach, like I said, it's been developed specifically for nanomaterials in general, so as applicable in any kind of industrial application. If you want to apply it to nanomedicines, there will be a couple of things that you have to modify, to amend, to make it fit. The stages might have to be defined a little bit differently. The gatekeepers may be different. The benefits is, of course, something that for medicinal products or medical devices is a big factor, and not for all substances or materials. And maybe access to scientific advice on the safety should have a place in there somewhere. The first steps have already been taken in this process in the NanoReg project, and it's being worked on continuously in NanoReg 2 already. And given that my time is up, I want to close this talk by saying that I thank all the contributors, especially from those projects that are working on the safe innovation approach, and of course also from my co-workers at the Institute that worked on the projects I introduced at the beginning. Thank you very much. Well, no, please. It's important for the recording that the...
Okay.
Be aware of that, you are being recorded.
Thanks for telling me. Oh, no, that's working. Okay, thank you very much for the nice presentation. I just have a question. We just got started with our nanobiomaterials thing, Safe by Design project here with partners from Portugal and from Romania. And we were asking the question, it was last Saturday actually when we had our kickoff meeting, we were actually asking ourselves whether you could define critical safety attributes, if that is a word, for these nanomaterials. if you could quantitate them, set specifications for these attributes, and if so, would you need to do this for each nanomaterial individually, or can you put them together in groups like liposomes or whatever?
Oh,
yeah.
Thank you, Gerrit. That's sort of the questions that everyone has in order to reach the ideal situation where you have this easy system to apply. And critical safety attributes is a new term for me, but it's interesting. We should consider thinking about it. What I do believe is that it depends very much on the particular projects, and specifically in medical products size, it will always have to be a case-by-case assessment and evaluation of the products. Nevertheless, you can of course try and see if you can identify certain aspects that need to have more attention for particular groups. Like I said, in our research we tried to do that as well. And I think that if you go further, that there will be some things that you can identify, and not just that it has to be immunotox, but also what kind of testing. And there will be other examples as well.
Thank you. So we are working on cancer vaccine project. But I think it is very important, as you mentioned a little bit, that you cannot look the safety alone. You have to look the proposed indication, what you want to use a medicinal product. As you mentioned that the safety is different when you use, for example, a vaccine to prevent a disease in children, then healthy children, then you need a different safety feature that you use a vaccine to treat metastatic cancer patient. So I think that you cannot really look at safety alone. Instead, I would recommend you to, when you work on any kind of development, drug development project, you consider risk-benefit. Because and then you list you, for example, have a therapeutic cancer vaccine, and you have your drug, the potential safety problems or advantage, and what could be the benefit that you get. And then you cannot really investigate independently on the proposed indication the safety. So I think that first you have to decide where you want to use your material, and then consider risk-benefit ratio. And when you have a likely positive one, you can go ahead with the development.
Yeah, I can just say I agree. Also, in view of the time, perhaps we should go on to the next speaker.